Good morning, everybody. It's Kanoa here with Baja123.com in Rosarito Beach, Mexico. And this morning I have Louis with me. Good morning, Louis.
Good morning, everybody.
And we asked Rafael to come in as a guest. Good morning, Rafael. I appreciate you coming and spending time with us this morning. Before I get you to introduce yourself, I just want to say I'm very appreciative of you coming and spending your time. You are one of the people that are online that are not afraid to get online and tell people the facts and the truth. And I think you've written thousands, it feels like, of articles and blog posts of helping people really understand what the truth is and the facts are when it comes to specifically real estate a lot and law here in Mexico and Rosarito. And I always read your posts. I always look for your guidance because I think you're probably one of the key sources of information that's putting this stuff out in English for the English-speaking community to understand how to best make choices and how to best understand how to navigate Mexico. And so would you do me a favor and please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background and what you do?
Sure. Thank you so much. My name is Rafael Solorzano Montenegro. That's how it sounds. And I was born in Tijuana, raised in Tijuana, educated here in Tijuana. I at one time lived in California, Santa Monica, where I have family. But back then, it was 70s. I wanted to become an attorney, but I could not afford the education in the U.S. and I didn't have residence, so I came back to Mexico. I always been law-abiding individual here, there, everywhere. I always felt the product of the border being raised here and having English. Sometimes I even scratch my head and wonder which is my first tongue, Espanol or English. Either way, I became an attorney here, and with time, I graduated back in '82, and speeding forward at 2020, I'm almost 63. Yeah, I'm taking gifts as off. I put the 13, by the way. And with time, I became an industry attorney. I have an environmental background, so I was one of the top two environmental attorneys in Baja California, along with Federico Kanoa from Baker McKenzie. So him and I represented pretty much the state industry, but that was I didn't actually feel myself doing that, even though it was very well paid and all that, very dynamic. But I always liked I always felt that I was people's person, and I like meeting people and helping people and getting to do things which are different than just representing companies and the industry. So my professional thesis was the study of the Mexican trust. So a bank hired me back in the 80s, Banco Nacional Mexico, which is now known as what is it now, CD Banamex. And the first fideicomiso that I was handed to me to manage was a master trust, El Pedregal in Cabo San Lucas. And then I got involved with an investment trust, which is huge, Exportadora de Sal, which is the salt mining operation in Guerrero Negro. And then they handed me Bahia Banderas in Puerto Escondido in Oaxaca. So I was managing the fideicomisos, but it was not my thing. You know, I feel that was more like an accountant or a business manager. So I wanted to be more of a field guy and being an attorney. So that was my start. Sure, yes, I have my professional thesis. Yes, I also came from the entrails of the bank. And yes, I managed banks. So I've done both angles. With time, I left the bank and I created my firm in Mexicali, came back to Tijuana, moved back to the States for 3 years when my daughter, Brianna, who now passed, we moved there to get her specialized medical services. So while we spent, the better part of 5 years in California. And I kept providing the same services to people in California, basically corporations, large corporations and mid-size and all size. Eventually, we came back to Mexico. I was invited by the city of Tijuana back in 2010 to be the director of economic promotion, being bilingual. And so I spent 3 years doing that, so I got to learn something that I didn't know much about, which was the state's economy, the DNA of the state's economy, not just Tijuana, but the whole state. So I got quite deep into it and liked it for a while, but it was just part of my training. So my first love has always been what I do, which is being a real estate and corporate attorney, and doing closings is mostly what I do. But with time, I noticed that there were so many mistakes done and executed by people who probably didn't recognize that they were specialized in certain portions of the industry itself. So they were trying to do too much. It kind of reminded me like Phil Rivers with the Chargers. When he started scrambling, he would commit mistakes because he was getting out of his comfort zone, right? So one time I stopped and I understood that I could not do everything. Yeah, one could say everyone could sell a property. Well, that's not it. It's different. So I tried to provide support, factual information, and experience that I'd logged in since 1988 that I became a bank attorney doing what fideicomisos and specifically closings. But I provide a lot of background, a lot of information to help someone negotiate, navigate the water, so to speak, before they actually decide on buying a property. So when they ask me, when should I hire you, Rafael? Well, I suggest to consider me before you actually go out in the market, because when you find that particular property or several properties, you want to make sure what is the language, what is the terminology, what are the terms, what are the costs, so that you are familiar with the lingo as well as with the costs and the formalities and the times involved.
You have a Facebook group called Baja Legal Advice, correct?
I do, yes.
So if people want, if they're on Facebook, they should probably come and join that group, and because you're putting up information constantly about good practices, what to watch out for, what to do. So it's a good place for people to follow you on Baja Legal Advice. But what got you to start Baja Legal Advice? Why did you? What was the motivation behind that?
Actually, it started out being Baja Legal. That's what I called it initially, but it seemed to like legal, okay, but legal, it means it could be tax advice, it could be divorces, it could be criminal. So, okay, tax advice, well, yeah, it's advice, but I didn't want to kind of limit it to just real estate. So I believe I'm on the 7th year already, or the 8th, I forgot. But Jess, I created that group. It's got a little over 2,200 people so far. And I'm not into numbers because I'm not one promoting like click here and say like, I'm a little probably, I don't know, it's not shy. It's just that I feel that I want to sell my services, but I don't want to be like too commercial. I guess I have family support, and there's a cost that I'm promoting here, in which people are integral part of that, because without funding, this isn't possible. But Baja Legal Advice is there to provide as much information as possible, but with a limited number of fields of expertise, which is corporate, which is real estate. And yes, corporate could mean a number of things. A lot of people sometimes want to create a foreign-owned corporation because they figure that I don't want to do the fideicomiso. But when and I've spoken quite a bit about it. If you want to create a fideicomiso, what is it that you actually want to do? You want to buy property, okay? There's certain cases where you must have a corporation. And there are other cases in which you actually don't need a corporation, but you should have a fideicomiso. And there are sometimes with husband and wife are from American and Mexican. So one of them actually wants to be the owner and of record, and the husband is probably the American, but they eventually need a fideicomiso. So I get into particular cases. Not every case is the same size for everyone. So it's pretty much custom made, tailor made. So every case is different. But yes, I write about a bunch of things, but only those within my field of expertise.
So when it comes to real estate right now, what do you think that people are doing this, like the biggest problem that they're having, because I think when we see clients come down here, they have the expectation that it's going to be exactly like the US, that we're dealing with a regulated industry that has a lot of oversight, that everybody that calls themselves a real estate agent, knows exactly what their profession is and all that. And I know that you're very vocal when it comes to calling out a lot of the mistakes, not only of the agents in the industry, but also of the clients, of them not making good choices, and you're having to come in and clean up a lot of, or being asked to fix a lot of problems that maybe could have been avoided if they would have talked to you prior to them getting into these situations.
Well, yes, as I was saying, and not every case is the same, but what is the average case I see when someone finds, say, a condominium in Tijuana? Okay, they go up and see one of those high rises, which there's still so many getting erected as we speak. Actually, it's kind of slowed down a bit at this point because of the crisis. But anyways, someone finds the condominium, sees a sign, so he calls the broker, the agent. They meet at the place, they introduce themselves, they start looking at the amenities, and the individual says, "Oh, this is nice, I want it." And they start talking about financials, and the guy eventually finds that he can actually afford it. So sometimes they don't even talk about escrow. The problem happens to be that, at least in the case of Tijuana, and again, every case is different, and I do travel far and wide, whole place all the way to the tip. So people figure like, okay, I want to buy the condominium. It's $180,000. And then you find out that you assume as a buyer that this individual is fully prepared as he would have to be based on, say, California law, Arizona law, Utah, whatever. There's similarities, and I would not be the one to say if they're exactly the same. I don't think they are. But they assume that this person is fully capable of understanding his own need, not that what he has to do in Mexico is the actual thinking of the individual, because he has to understand that this buyer figures that things are similar to what they are back home. Either way, it's his job to enlighten him and to provide a step-by-step process of what is the formalities in Mexico to buy property, so as to go. The financials are important, but they're not that important at this point, because this person might just be, say, Mexican-American, have two double nationalities, right? And then you probably have him do a fideicomiso. He might not even need one because he has dual citizenship, right? And it's quite common because a lot of people want to avoid paying $2,200 grant in Chula Vista when they can actually come across, is Century and go back and save themselves quite a penny if they buy in Mexico something nearby. But either case is different. So the problem happens to be, as you said before, that people in the States assume that these people know what their needs are, and people here actually sometimes don't even care what the needs of this guy are because he just wants to sell. Unfortunately, it sounds that cold, but unfortunately, most of the time that is a time-proven circumstance. So I figured that I'm convinced actually that every real estate agent addressing the needs of a foreign buyer should always start out by the ABCs, right? You're a foreign national. This is Mexico. The laws of this country force you to consider the following scenarios to purchase property, considering what property is. Oh, industrial, commercial space, empty lot, or condominium, or build home, or so there's so many scenarios that one needs to custom or tailor that particular case for that individual to have to understand the formalities, the laws, the times, the cost. And I know that in my case, I include tax advice and estate planning as part of it, because yes, buying a home is probably the most important financial decision you're ever going to make, right? Particularly so in a foreign country where you figure, oh, estate planning, why should I worry? I have my living will, my living trust in the U.S. or in Canada. Well, it's not the exact same thing. You have to make sure that they both coincide instead of become a problem because of collision. But even those things, and I understand not everyone is able to throw that in as a value added as I am. But as I said, if every agent started out by addressing the ABCs about the formalities, about the laws, about the times, and about the cost, and then tailoring that case, that property to that individual, things might be better. But
but we know that's not happening here, right? I mean, so we know that they're not doing it, right? And that's part of the problem. And so I want to say,
it should be a rule.
It should be a rule. So this is probably where you come in. So the agents should be good at helping people find the properties that they want, right? That should be their job, is locating the property that would fit their needs. That's really what I think the best purpose of the agent is to understand the inventory, understand the situation with the inventory, and then get the right people involved to help close that transaction, or do the service, add the third-party services in order to transfer title, in order to transfer funds, so that way that the clients are having a safe and a secure transaction, and the agents are trying to be a one-man band and trying to do everything themselves. And in that, then they put people at risk because they're not doing their specialty.
Yeah, and one thing that agents should do, and not limited to Tijuana, but I see this in Tijuana quite often. This is, why am I saying Tijuana? There's a lot of high rises for sale now. A lot of them were actually pre-sold to Mexicans in Central Mexico, which are doing it as investment property. But you know what happens? It's like Kanoa, Louis, and Rafael are the owners. They put their money together and they bought this many units, right? So when someone is looking at a property, they figure that the developer is the one selling. No, it's Kanoa, Luis, and Rafael, okay, co-owners. So who's the one that's supposed to sell and enter an agreement? The owners or the developer? And then there's a lot of kids that are now acting, or probably even licensed, I don't know, in Tijuana, and they say, no, it's a developer. But when you ask for the proof of ownership, right, they get this print from the Registro Público de la Propiedad y Comercio, or a copy of the deed. And you see there's Luis, Kanoa, and Rafael. It's not the developer. But they want the developer to be part of it. And you go figure, like, let's get this straight. Who's actually the one selling? And then you realize that, yes, these three people bought the unit, but they never got it transferred to them. So there is not deeded to them. Why? Because they didn't go full circle and they didn't notarize. They bought it, but they didn't get it transferred. See? So they had the rights to it, but eventually the guy, the selling party is going to be the developer, because they don't want it deeded to us three to pay that 2.4% to be sold back to them. See what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I'm thinking it's a little complicated for people, and that's why they need somebody like you to be able to identify that stuff, because most agents aren't going to go that deep. Because I know when you say this, most agents want to get paid. They're doing this for a living. They want to get their commission. They're looking for the ways that they can get through, navigate this, and definitely navigating in Mexico, it does take some navigation. If everything was perfect, anybody could do it, and it's complicated here. And each situation is its own new project to be able to look at. And some of them are simple, but a lot of them aren't. And so that's where I think somebody like you would come in, and to be able to offer guidance, be able to offer the reality of what the situation is. And I have to say this because the most important thing for me as a broker is that we disclose. People should have the ability to understand everything that's involved, so that they can make the decision of how they want to spend their money and what level of risk they're willing to accept. Because some people, they're dealing with their life savings. They've saved up their whole life to come down here and buy a retirement home, and if lose this or something happens, then that's it. They don't have any backup. But then we have other people that are investors that maybe are willing to take more risk, coming in pre-construction, coming into people where things were a problem, because they can come in and offer lower offers and get a better deal because of those problems. But as long as we're disclosing and we're giving everybody the right information, they can choose then how much risk they're willing to take and what they're willing to do according to what that particular situation is. And that's my biggest flag that I'm waving, is let's just tell everybody what's the reality is, and that way they can make those choices in order to realize what risk they're willing to take.
Yeah, and I fully agree with that, because I believe we're getting into the one particular weakness of the industry. I believe that the agent should be responsible for doing the due diligence himself to fully understand the particular case. you're not buying a fresh car out of the dealership. You're buying probably a car that has been driven already, or probably was bought, but it was left at the parking lot and then not driven. But it's not the dealer who's selling, because the owner happens to be someone else. So those very apparently slight issues are actually complications if you did the seller don't address it from the get-go, because it's a responsibility. They're assuming they're trusting you to be able to interpret that and be able to say, this is streamlined operation. Oh no, it has to go through certain filters in order to get to this point. And that is time and money, because normally the agent just delivers this to the closer, or even straight on to the notario, who has got staff who handle closings, right? But they don't do what? The due diligence part, which is so critical at this point. So I could not say that over the many closings that I've done in my lifetime, I could say that this one is almost exactly the same as the other, unless they were buying in the same complex or a condominium or something. But even when we get to condominiums, and you know this, when it comes to pre-sales, I usually shy away from pre-sales. I tell people, careful with that. And what a better example of that here in the today.
Yes.
You look around the skylines in Tijuana and Rosarito, complexes that didn't happen. They've been there for 12, 15 years, like Playa Blanca, right next to Playa Blanca. Or you look at those high rises in Tijuana that eventually stopped. And those people were sold the idea, no, this is going to cost $220,000, but if you start now, we'll give you a 7.5% or 12% discount. It's in pesos, and it looks good. But eventually, something like this happens. Obviously, we didn't plan for it, but it is a fact, and it's not going up. And where's your money? What are your expectancies? And if you wanted to invest, now all those dreams are like broken. I don't know. None of us know what's going to happen. But again, it's those things that that you need to address. But this is just pre-sale that I'm addressing. If you bought something else which is already there, and you probably are not the first unit buyer, you probably bought it from someone else. So is there a fideicomiso? Is this a corporation? Is this a developer? Is this actually an adjudication? Adjudicated property is quite complex, because Banorte happens to own most of the client base along the coast of many developments that eventually took place, Las Palmas, Calafia, you name it, and not doubting anyone. I'm just saying that they're that visible. But eventually there's so many properties that were taken over, and even some of those properties are being rented under the nose of the bank without them knowing. So eventually they want to strike a deal, a rent to own, and then they notice that there's a lot of time going through, and 4 6 months, and they're not able to close because there's some information that was not ever disclosed to the buyer because there were issues. So particularly in those cases, people should know what they're getting into, but unfortunately, who's the one that's supposed to disclose that to them? The agent is. So the due diligence, Kanoa, I believe, is so critical at this point to address that it should be the standard of every decent agent to understand that particular case, to be able to interpret and be able to be responsible and be provide that support, that advice to the client.
And and that's what, like, our wish list. I mean, that would be like in a perfect world, but in the reality today, if people want to move down here, what would be the advice that you would give people? Because we know that a lot of the properties are challenges, but it doesn't mean that they can't buy them. They're just going to have to work through the challenges. And a lot of this stuff that what we want to do is we want to help them, guide them today until we get to that point of where we have a better, maybe more professional people that are working in the market. What would the advice be today, so that way they can come down here, they can navigate those challenges, and they can end up with a property? Because if we waited for perfection, then the whole market would stop, because that's not going to happen today. We've got to be able to deal with the situations.
Yes, and thank you for saying that. Actually, I closed on a property, and it's owned by was owned by a client of mine in La Pastora, which is north of Todos Santos. And eventually it took us from September of last year until this week with Bancomer, and I'm saying the name. It's not a bad bank. It's just a bank that is very complicated. It's very regulated, and it's got internals that actually translate to the buying process. And sometimes those internal policies are a cause for a transaction to fall through. So even though it's one of the probably dozens of things that could actually go wrong or could have an impact on a transaction, in the meantime, I actually transacted property that took me 5 weeks to close on and transfer to the client with a different bank, Banbajio. Yes, I'm naming it because I'm not Bad Bunny. I'm just stating the facts. Who's easier to navigate and all that. But what should someone do before they want to buy? Let's assume that they decided to rent in Mexico and start feeling themselves, feeling their way in. And I always remind this, and I believe I even mentioned it when you invited me to your office to do that presentation. I told you about that Bugs Bunny cartoon that he's getting into a hot tub and he's going, at a time, right? You go like, ooh, 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 you're feeling the waters, my friend, right? So I don't want people to be like the salesperson putting someone into a Cadillac, like, oh, you feel cushy, oh, turn the ignition, oh, look at the stereo. No, you have to be careful. You have to go slow. You have to be, but you have to know the system at least to have some introduction. And I like that you always say, if you're to move here and you want to buy, I suggest that you rent first. You ask the questions, and I always say, pause down, don't hurry up, get as much information, but get it from credible sources, okay? If you ask a buyer, the buyer will tell you what he saw, what he noted, what he understood from his end. If you ask a developer, you get a lot of information, unbiased information. But in this case, they have to know what are the formalities, what are the costs. A lot of people come here and figure that they're going to make a killing in the industry. Unfortunately, it's not. And I'm saying this, I could be all by a country mile, but you're not making any money in the industry today, not at this point. If you're looking at Cabo, probably that's different. If we're talking about Nópolis out of Loreto, that's different. Yeah, they're now making money, even though they went through a whole bunch of features. But every case is different. So the rules to buy, and if you're a savvy buyer and you know what you're doing, you could probably get a much lower asking price if you're able to know what you're doing. But at this point, you need to know what their formalities are. What is your budget? What do you have to look for? Even the contract part, there's a lot of issues, and people don't even wink at how important a contract is. You have to talk about realistic closing times. You have to talk about a closing cost. You have to talk about payment methods. Give you an idea. My client from Los Cabos who sold the other day was asking why didn't the capital gains were not paid out of escrow. Well, I didn't get involved in the escrow part because they already had discussed that. But yes, I agree. Escrow should have been told to have this much, whatever capital gains out of the purchase price, be forwarded and routed to that account number of the notario to pay the capital gains. So I get involved in all those phases, but sometimes the agent is supposed to do that. They're specially trained. Again, getting to know formalities, getting to know the times and the costs are important. Realistic closing costs are not the same if you're buying a brand new unit, an empty lot, or if you're getting an assignment of fideicomiso, in which you have to understand, is there, how many years left do you have in your fideicomiso? Oh, it's a 50-year fideicomiso. Oh, you're on the 15th year, so there's 35 years left. But if you're buying and you're asking me, and I noticed that it's HSBC, it's Scotia, those banks are no longer taking in new business, I suggest you're coming in, it's going to cost you regardless. So why not simply switch over to a bank that is up and coming, because there's a lot of traffic in banks that are no longer taking business, and that is an important part to address. But if it's not, eventually you sold it, you dump them into a notario's office, and the guy is like, almighty, when is this ever going to stop, and how much is it going to cost me? And then what happens? deals fall through because they set an unrealistic closing time of 60 days on a non-refundable deposit, which is absolutely abusive. How can you say that it's not reimbursable? It should always be escrow. It should always be an escrow because escrow is your protection. And it's a blatant lie to say that there's no escrow in Mexico. Lie, lie, lie. There is escrow here. And it's a protection that people should consider.
So, Rafael, so right now, so I don't want to scare everybody to think that they can't come down here and buy real estate, but I hear the message that you're saying is just be careful and cautious on the people that you're choosing to represent you, to make sure you're having the right people that understand how to do this properly, so that way you can have a good experience, because property is being bought and sold here every day to the foreign market, and it can be done, and it can be done in the correct way. Did I say that right?
Yeah. And thank you for saying that, because see, one thing is to buy, and you said it before, and another thing is to actually become the owner, the legal owner of that. So in between what happens from buying to owning, there's a space of time that is sometimes indefinite, because someone has to be responsible for continuing and being able to spell to the buyer what are the many intricacies, formalities, times, and costs that had to be there. That's the due diligence part, right? So it's easy to buy. What people need to understand is they need the guiding process to be spelled clearly beforehand in order to make a decision. So oftentimes people come to me with an agreement already in place where they already put down money, and the cash kind of deposit instead of the escrow. Okay, that's workable, no problem, we can do that. But you need to have the advice to be able to understand that you definitely want to have this come to fruition, to be close, to be yours, with the right bank at the right cost within the right time frame.
And just because before we run out of time, I really want you to tell people, because I know you are definitely not a discount lawyer. I mean, you are a specialist at what you do, and your time is very valuable. So I want to make it clear to people that who would come to you, and what kind of clients are you looking for that you'd ideally be able to serve?
Well, that's a great question. I see that there's people who are buying land for a number of purposes, particularly developing from trailer park to a condominium or a campo, all that. Some clients are just wanting to buy a condo unit or empty lot or take over a fideicomiso. But I believe that the buyers that want to become the drivers of their own car, not to be led by the hand and be kept in the dark, so to speak, to come to me. Not that I want to be the teacher of everything, but I believe it's a responsibility. If you hire my services, my responsibility to enlighten you, to train you, to school you, to be the master of your own destiny, for you to be able to go forward and complete it, or to be able to pull away on time. So I know that my rates are higher than most, and I believe that they're justifiable because, as I said, I'm not just delivering you into someone's hands. I'm taking care from one end to the other until you become the deeded owner of that property, and you know that even the contents of the fideicomiso are spelled to you, and you know what your rights and obligations are. So if you just want to buy and later start asking, what is a fideicomiso? Did I ever sign a fideicomiso? But if I pay for the comiso, well, you then come to me. If you just want to buy something and deal with the consequences later, there's options for that. But I believe that if you want to have peace of mind, tranquility, and have everything spelled clearly, correctly to you, I'm your man.
People are looking to come here. I've dealt with thousands, tens of thousands of people over the last 15, 20 years that we've been here, and people are coming to Mexico for a discount, and they have the mentality of wanting to get a discount. And we understand that they're going to be able to purchase property here at a discount compared to maybe in California and stuff like that. And I always like to tell them, there's places to look for the discount, but then there's other places that you don't want to get a discount because you get what you pay for. And so there's going to be certain things that you're going to want to pay a little bit extra to get the better person or the better representative, the better company, so you're not always looking for that discount. I see the mistake that people make more often than ever is they want that real estate agent to be that one-man band. They want them to take them from beginning to ending, from showing the property to doing the closing to being the escrow to being everything, because they get to work down that agent to try to be all of that, and they end up with a situation where they're dealing with somebody that isn't trained to do any of that, maybe trustworthy enough to do any of that, doesn't know what they're doing, and the agent's just trying to do it so they can get the commission. And the fact is that they should be looking for the professionals and paying those professionals to do the job that they're trained on. And that comes from the accountants to the lawyers to the closing services. Everybody should have their role. And I really, unless that person, and there's very few of them, can do all of that, and I would definitely be asking for references and referrals to make sure that one person is able to do all of that. But for the most part, most of the people that call themselves real estate agents shouldn't be involved in every process all the way to the end, especially when it comes to some of the more complicated legal parts of this.
Well, yes, and see, as I travel so often and so wide and far, I see cases, extreme cases, and I'm really honored by the opportunity. But sometimes I notice that it's like someone is selling a home in a rented land property. Well, it's okay if you know what you're dealing with. What are the implications? What are the pitfalls of that? I'm not saying that compo owners are bad. It's just that it's so affordable that it's always like, if I want that spot to be my spot for the next 20 some years, and I'm 63. What are my expectancies of life over the next few years? Well, probably 20 in the extreme case if I'm that favored. But if you're 40s or 50s, someone like you or someone younger, sometimes when even profiling a buyer, you're even asking those questions. Not that you won't transfer this to your kids, but you always tailor everything. And I start out from that point too. So I'm very probably forward in addressing issues like that. If you cannot afford something about $100,000 and you want to have a view and you want to have the time on something which is not complicated, not overly developed, but there's a view of La Bufadora or a view of Campo Verde or Bahia Asunción, just make sure what you bargain for. Yes, you can find bargains, but Paradise has its issues sometimes, either the mosquitoes or getting there or whichever. But if you want the best, you guys have the best listings. I always refer you right at the top from the beginning, and I know sometimes you're even overwhelmed with requests and all that. It's a good industry to be in, but I also believe it's a privilege and it's a responsibility that comes along with it to be able to spell this clearly from the beginning so that our clients are taken care of.
Yeah, and I just want to say, we're not perfect. We're learning. I've learned so much from you. I highly recommend people going to Baja Legal Advice and they read the information you're putting. It's probably some of the best information that is getting put out in our community, or at least in Mexico, in English, so that people can become educated and they can make smart choices when it comes to buying or selling real estate in Mexico. And once again, you can help them, guide them through that. They can offer you, they can come in and hire you to do that. And if people really want everything done by the book, making sure that everything's done correctly, I think Rafael is an incredible resource. And I always recommend, for those people that are, some people just want to go, I want to pay the cheapest. And I'm going, well, you're going to get what you pay for. But if you want to have the services and have somebody really look out for you, because this is your life savings and this is something that you don't have the ability to risk. And I do believe that you will give them great advice. I think you also do estate planning. So that way, if they have foreigners here and they can come and they can get, in case something happens, that everything is set up correctly. And I think we can come back on later at another point and maybe talk about that. I would appreciate that. And anything else that I already know that there's I could talk to you for hours. We could be talking for hours. There's so much information that I think that you have that we would love to get out to the public, because if these are our friends, our families, and our neighbors, and we want people to come down here, and we want them to have a good experience. We want them to be able to buy into that lifestyle that they're really hoping to come down here and get. And we want that first part of that to be a good experience, which is the real estate part, and that way they can, start off when they move down here to really enjoy what Mexico has to offer. Because I do believe it, we have so much to offer. It's a little challenging sometimes.
Yeah, I closed property in different jurisdictions in Mexico outside of the peninsula. But there's so much in the peninsula, why distract myself? Honest to God, I've driven it, I've flown it, I walked it. When I was a hunter, I never did get to pull a trigger because I always have this issue with killing. I was just there for the sightseeing. But I got to meet so many nice folks from different walks of life. It's like when you're going to San Felipe, there's a different scenario. People come from different parts. You come to this side, which is more West Coast folks, or you go to Los Cabos, where I run a seminar, or Nopolo, where I have people from New Zealand, from Australia, from Brisbane, from South Wales, from South Africa. I mean, it's so diverse. So we're privileged to be here in this peninsula. But I believe, and I probably as a closing comment, that as what, and I like to reflect this, I sometimes purposely have asked for a seat right next to a cockpit in an airplane. And I do get to see what's drilled before they take off. And you know what they do? Pre-flight check. Mm-hmm. You have to have your pre-flight check before you start out in the water. If you're going to start driving towards Cubina or Santa Monica or Palm Beach, whichever, what is it you do? You chart your way, don't you? You have to chart your way everywhere you go. Mexico is not an exemption. Therefore, I'm the guy who's supposed to help charting your way for a successful drive over and back.
Well, I'm going to put all your contact information. We already have so much of your information into Rosarito Living, I think, and Baja123.com. We are constantly putting your information so you can find him and read some of his articles there. You can read some of his articles in the Rosarito Living Facebook group. We'll put the contact information, email, phone numbers. Anyway, if you have more questions for him, you can get a hold of him. I really do appreciate your time. I hope and that you are enjoying your binge watching. I'm following your recommendations for Netflix programs right now, because I see that we're going old school with some of the movies.
Yeah, I've been watching. I become a fun fan of Musketeers. It's not Musketeers. It's the Musketeers. Movies of the 1930s. Man, they are fun.
They're the best.
Cisco Kid. Oh, Cisco Kid is so entertaining.
Yeah, they're the
Leo
best.
Carrillo, which is quite a story, because there were two, Cisco and Pancho, right? And Cisco was actually from Lithuania. He's got a story because he actually came illegally into the U.S., but he had an accent, so he could not ever get rid of. So roles for him were limited because of that circumstance. Pancho was Pancho, but he was American, born in L.A. He was the descendant of a former governor of California, actually, when it was Mexico. But Leo Carrillo, Leo Carrillo State Park and Malibu and all that. But anyways, it's so fun. Hey, Cisco, don't get into fights because someone is going to shoot me until I'm dying. But anyway, there's something to be done. And I'm actually, picking up weight, my space is all this, but we're going to be alive if we're smart and responsible with ourselves, because out there, we don't want to complicate life to anyone else's. We have an obligation to our own, and that's where we start off so that we are able to go back. If life is going to be different when we are eventually go out like I have an issue pronouncing the name Puxtawani. What is the name of that gopher? The gopher that it comes out and tells you how long is the spring going to take.
I don't, yeah.
Puxtawani something. It's a huge gopher that comes out in the spring in Pennsylvania.
It's the shadow, right?
Yeah, the shadow, that he looks at his own shadow. At this point, we're looking at our own shadow. But you know what? It's a time to reflect and to be grateful. This is Good Friday for those believers or not, but I'd like to pass this on, that we should not let hope escape from us, that it's time to reflect and be humble by the fact that we're alive, that we have a responsibility, that we have an opportunity to have an impact from within, inside, to go out and give our best to people out there. and I'm just refreshing my boast and my commitment to my family and to all of you. Thank you so much for being my friend and giving me the opportunity to speak my mind.
Thank you very much, and take care. Best wishes to you and your family. Bye-bye, everybody. We'll talk to you soon.
Good Friday, all. Bye-bye. Thank you.